humiliation, disgrace, seeing someone we love, seeing something happen to someone we love, quite a number of real things that cause involuntary suffering. And then there's the voluntary suffering, which again I think we all experience, and that is when we do something for the sake of a reward. If we're an athlete, for instance, and we have to train, if we want to be successful, we have to train, and the training involves suffering, physical, and also means renouncing the time that we might give to something we prefer to do to training. The same way studying for an exam, there has to be some degree of suffering. Well, this voluntary suffering cannot be the involuntary suffering may be transmuted. I'll say something about that in a minute. But the voluntary suffering cannot be transmuted. It's the reward for the voluntary suffering is the success in whatever it is you seek to achieve. You pass your exam or you win the race, right. That's the reward for that suffering. The involuntary suffering, in certain circumstances, can bring an invisible reward. We all know of people, for instance, dying of cancer, who've been quite transformed spiritually and psychologically in their last days, the last months. It's possible for them. Someone, I think it was John Penn, possibility for them, and there's no interference from others. Now, we come then to two kinds of suffering which are not normally understood, and the first is what we call unnecessary or evil suffering. All the things that we put upon ourselves, all the grievances, the dislikes, the hatreds, the anxieties, the fears, the unnecessary fears, that one is not being properly treated, the feeling that life is unfair, that one is being badly done to, the feeling that other people don't behave as they should. All these things are unnecessary and evil. If a child is out, for instance, late, there's no use feeling anxiety and suffering, although most people consider it very meritorious to do so. Oh, I'm not ever so worried about it. I'm terribly anxious. But this anxiety, this worry, can't do anything for the child if the child is in some danger for some reason or other. If one knows how to pray, and that's something that may be taught in school too, in some schools, then that may be helpful. But it's no use worrying. It doesn't do any good at all. It's just draining energy away. One just has to accept. There's a prayer, whatever thou doest, I will thank you and remain always grateful. Accept always the divine will. A lot of work is done on this evil suffering in groups. In fact, in some groups it constitutes almost the main theme, because there are different groups have slightly different emphases. Some of them incline more to the emotional side, and some of them incline more to the perhaps the physical side, like the movements and the sacred dances and things like that. But they all the groups follow the fourth way theme of working on all three centres. And that brings us then to the idea of what is intentional suffering. Well, intentional suffering has nothing to do with voluntary suffering. It's when one does something for another person without reward, and one has to pay for it. You know, that we generally feel that if we do someone a good turn, we deserve to be thanked, it deserves to be appreciated. In practice, it very often happens that we have to make a double payment. We have to make the payment of the effort, and we also have to make a payment of the unpleasant consequences that ensue. A very simple example. Supposing, perhaps oversimple, and supposing you know someone, a lonely man, shall we say, you feel sorry for him, so you invite him round for a meal and a chat, and he comes round and he's got a streaming cold and a big Alsatian dog with him. You get the cold and the family gets the cold and the dog does a certain amount of naughtiness in the house. That is intentional suffering. As I say, that's perhaps rather an oversimplification, but the point is that in intentional suffering, you do what is required to be done without regard to whether the consequences are going to be unpleasant or not. They need not be, of course. I mean, I'm talking to you now, and I may upset somebody, and that would be, they indicate to me they're not pleased with me. That's a form of intentional suffering. One just has to accept that. So the double payment needed for serving or helping others has to be accepted. Very good example, isn't it, that people accept intentional suffering without thinking about it, is the mother and the baby. She's continually the mother's continually sacrificing herself for the baby, simply because it's there and has to be done. It's not a question that she feels it's good to do it or virtuous, and it's just there. If the baby just calls for attention, without the attention of the mother, the baby will die if it's very young. And therefore, in the course of that, there will be a double payment, won't there? Because the baby will wake up in the night and all the rest of it. And all this has to be done without reward, without regard for any return or reward. If a parent is foolish enough to expect their children to make a return to them when they grow up, then they've missed the point of it all. Coming up for another 5 minutes, I think. Just give me a chance to say, anticipated perhaps question, there's no general recruitment of fourth-way groups. Most of the people in these groups are brought in by people who are already in other words, introduced, sponsored. A few get in exceptionally, if they're tenacious enough perhaps to track something down and to write, be considered on its merits. But what the fourth-way groups are looking for is what Gurdjieff called good householder. And that is a person, an ordinary person in life, the sort of person who is responsible, who has a stable family life, does an ordinary job with a reasonable degree of efficiency, pays their taxes and conforms to the law. Those householders. Now, a few of those people are what he called good householders with magnetic centre. Despite all that, they feel drawn to something. They're not quite sure what it is, and they're continually looking for something beyond life. They're continually looking for some meaning, some purpose, some certainty. Good householder with magnetic centre. Those are the people who want it. There are two other kinds of people, very common. What G called tramps and lunatics. Now, lunatics are not people who are insane. They are people who've got the solution for things. You know, they go to camp outside Greenham Common or something like that. They're going to solve the great problems which of war and so on, which if they could have been solved, would have been solved centuries ago. They, as a rule, don't bother fourth way group because they're quite happy with their own ideas. But then there's another category of people, tramps. Now the tramp, what is a tramp? A tramp is a person who goes about from place to place looking for something for nothing, or for practically nothing. And that's no good. People are wanted who are persistent. People are wanted who are responsible. Uspensky, G's principal pupil perhaps, was once asked, is there any difference between people coming in? Are any of them better than the others? And he said, no, not really. There's only one difference, he said, responsibility. Some people are responsible and others not. Now that's about it, I think.
We've got some questions coming.
Did you say you worked under Mrs. Pogson?
Yes.
Had she ever met Gurdjieff?
Yes, I think so. But she actually, you've got to just remember that Gurdjieff died in 1949. That's 53 years ago. So there aren't all that many people about today who were pupils of his then. After all, in those days, you had to be fairly mature anyway before you could start. It used to be said that the best age for starting to work was 40. The reason for that is you've got to try a number of things for yourself first. You've got to get burned, as it were, by life. And then you're looking for something more, something beyond life. So I don't think that you will find any people about today who were actually with working with Gurdjieff. But Suzanne mentioned Mrs. Pogson. That's not the extent of my connection with the G teaching. I was in her group for 10 years, but there have been a number of other groups as well, and also connections with the Sufis and certain aspects of esoteric Christianity. I think all these things can be helpful if you can blend them, as it were, and relate them. But questions about people and who knew who and so on, as a rule, don't advance things. For instance, we know Gurdjieff's niece, but I wouldn't like to suggest from that she taught anything. Actually, she did teach, but it was by the way she was, not verbally, not intellectually. Having lived with G, since her father died, she was in her teens, I think, until she was getting on to 30. Because, of course, it was the practice in that part of the world, a great family, and if the man died, then his nearest male relative would take over his family as well. So I don't know that actual contact with him. There are actually 2 or 3 other relatives of his in this country who take absolutely no interest in the teaching at all. That's quite usual.
Yes, but wouldn't you think that Gurdjieff's presence himself was a vital aspect of his teaching? But in other words, the teacher is important to the group, a real teacher, as opposed to, say, someone who may have known Gurdjieff for months or weeks and then set himself or herself up. I mean, there are such people, right, in my opinion, perhaps you don't agree, who've not been appointed, as it were, as teachers, but have set themselves up.
That's an interesting question. Appointed. when actually the group I belonged to wasn't Mrs. Pogson's, it was Dr. Morris Nichols.
Oh yes, that's very fine.
Dr. Morris Nichols spent, I think, about 18 months at the Priory with G. Then he went back and worked with Uspensky. And one day he upset Uspensky, and Uspensky said, "Go away, Nichols, go away and teach." Now, was he appointed a teacher? I don't know. But the important thing is, you've got a good point there. The important thing is no one can elect themselves a teacher. Someone one recognises has to tell you to teach. It doesn't matter whether they're necessarily spot on or not. And there's a reason for that if we think about it.
Very nice of you. Thank you, dear.
Someone has to.
Nice, thank you.
I think it was Uspensky who said, self-will gets in the way all the time. It's better to obey the will of the cat than your own self-will. Even if it's only the cat, so something like that.
Question that this is just a point of interest question. Did John Bennett ever elaborate on why cancer should have create special conditions?
I don't know that he elaborated on it, but I think I can try and answer myself. What are the characteristics of someone who's in a terminal condition with cancer? First of all, there's a diminution of the physical powers, which of course leaves the other powers, the mind and the feelings, clearer, relatively stronger. Secondly, there's an inevitability about it, so that they have to face up to their death. G once said that if we could constantly be aware of our own mortality, the fact that we're one day going to die, and that everyone on whom we cast our glance is also going to die, it would be helpful. And something like that, I think, so that in becoming reconciled to the inevitability of death, and the fact, as I say, that the mind and the feelings become freer, become less enmeshed in the body. I think it has something to do with it. But it's really a question of acceptance. If the will of God is accepted, a lot of things become possible. If you accept that the inevitability of it. I can't say more than that. I don't know that Bennett ever went into it. What he did say was that he'd known people who'd been completely transformed in the last week or two of their lives. But they were dying like that.
So in fact it's the inevitability of the condition, perhaps, rather than anything specific to the disease of cancer.
It's not specific to cancer, no. I mean, there are probably other conditions, but they're not as usual, are they? There's usually, there isn't the inevitability as a rule. Isn't that? I think that's it.
On that cancer thing, could it show the possibility that the body's only here for a while and the body slowly fades away, but the mind, if it just is forever,
Yeah.
so it doesn't get affected? Could it be that?
Yes, it's a realization of mortality, you mean, that the body is only a tomb, in a sense, that the carcass is only a shell. Yes.
Passing in man and going through time, so to speak.
There's an interesting exercise which you can try sometime if you want to, in which you sit quietly without distractions, perhaps in a room with a dim light, and you gradually relax so that all the muscle tension goes out. Probably no exercises for this, for relaxing the muscles. And having done that, and then not cease to be aware of any outside sounds, and then cease to be aware of any muscle tension and feelings in the body. Then one is aware that the thinking and feeling is going on. So try to go behind first of all, drop feeling away and even feel anything. And then try to go behind again, and you're left with some thought about that. And if you try to shut out the thought and leave nothing, then the question is, where are you then? What is there? This is an interesting exercise. There's something there which cannot be observed, and the reason why it cannot be observed, of course, it is the observer. You see, you look through your eye, you cannot be aware of the eye looking, you're just aware of the picture that comes on the brain, and it's the same with the center of one's being. So maybe if people who really are brought nearer to that state, it's useful for them.
You know, because you talk about the mountaineering as well, because they go beyond, well, they take so much pain that you snap behind the body, don't you? You actually withdraw, so to speak, and the body turns itself off, and then all you've got left is your mind.
Yes, of course. There's that, because the doctors usually try to remove the pain as well as possible, don't they? But nevertheless, the body goes on weakening.
Could I don't know anyone else if they want to go. Has anyone else got a question? Because I would like to hear a bit more about what G said happened to all of us after death. I mean, regardless of our state of development. I would be interested to hear some more on that if other people would be interested.
Yes, that's interesting. Well, death actually is a much more complicated process than is normally understood. First of all, there are several deaths, one after the other. First of all, there's the time when the doctor comes along and pronounces the patient dead. And then there's the time, which may be anything up to 3 days later, when the body Kesjan leaves them, or the soul leaves the physical body. I mentioned that only a few people have a body Kesjan. I mean, a formed, shaped body Kesjan. Otherwise, there's a mass of inchoate matter which is in place of it, and that will leave the body, sometimes immediately, sometimes not, up to 3 days, and in some religions they won't interfere with a dead person for 3 days, will they? Certainly won't dispose of the body. All right, then that second body then rises to a place that's appropriate for its development. That's not to be taken literally, it means to the level of being which is appropriate for it, and then it has to suffer all the consequences of the past life, all the pain and unhappiness one has caused others, one feels back, and also the good things come back, so that there's a certain experiencing, and the mistakes of the past life have to be seen and repented. The problem is, of course, that as long as we are in the physical body, we can dispose of energies, we can transmit energies, and we can change something. Once we're out of the physical body, we have no mechanism, no means of transforming, changing anything. So the person concerned just has to suffer. One can learn, learn great many things there, but you can't actually make anything any different. You can't improve. In that field, in that world, which is sometimes called the second world, the world of the spirits, not the spirit, the spirits with an S on it, time is different. And the second body is subject to a different kind of time. It can go backwards and forwards in time. It's still subject to time in the sense that it ultimately wears out. Right, well eventually when all the work of purification and understanding and seeing what's gone wrong and so on has been finished, as it were, the soul stuff material is like washed clean, then it too will die. And will go to its place, what in Peer Gynt is called the button moulder. You know, where all the old psychic material is taken and churned up and reused. What Jung called the collective unconscious, what Bennett called the soul stuff pool. And people who say, well, they remember living a life previously or something, take it as evidence of reincarnation, because it's not evidence of reincarnation. Some of them, remembrance, have been drawn into them, almost by accident, as it were. Anyway, so that too disappeared. Now the question then is there anything beyond the second body which is imperishable? And if it's imperishable, it means it's not material. In other words, it's will, just will. That's why I mentioned creating an immortal will. And if that will is there, then there's a possibility for something continuing to develop and to grow. So G said once a man reaches that stage, that he has this will, this embryonic will, what he called the soul in conception, in embryo, then he will go on, he's bound to go on over a cycle of rebirths until eventually he escapes. And incidentally, the question of rebirths is not a question of reincarnation as ordinarily understood. I think scientists are now coming out to this as well. In fact, we are living in a universe which is a multiple universe, many layers, many lines overlaid, and you pass from one to the other. So you can be reborn on another line, much the same as before, but different. Whatever it is, after the second body has been reused, there's a sort of electromagnetic field been set up, and the consequences of past life, what in the Far East is called karma, isn't it? You set up your karma. That's like an electromagnetic field, and that will attract inevitably a similar sort of organism, similar sort of body to what one had before. And of course, if one has learned lessons in this life and developed in this life, then that will go forward. It's something like that. That's something like G's teaching. So he talks about the first Raskalano, the second, which means a separation, and the second Raskalano, and so on. Does that answer it?
Yes, thank you. But I know of his own wife, Gurdjieff apparently described her as an old soul.
Yeah, he did.
Yes, what would he have meant by that?
That she had many lives, and that she had in the course of those lives evolved almost to the point of being able to escape. And he hoped that by keeping her alive for a certain length of time, she was dying, she would achieve what was necessary. It was never made clear whether in fact she did achieve it or not, but that was the aim.
I take it that the central thrust of Gurdjieff's message is not to concern ourselves with the afterlife, but to do something in this life which we're supposed to do. I mean, that's the way I interpret it.
Did you catch that,
That
Dick?
we can spend a lot of time imagining things about reincarnation, but all this is a waste of time. We have a very short time here on earth, and I suppose we have to realise or discover, hopefully, what it is we're here for. What would you say is the central message that Gurdjieff offers in that direction? Was that too general a question?
Did you pick that up, Dick?
Yes, I think so. Well, I suppose, in a way, his central message wouldn't be very different from that of Meister Eckhart, the mystic, the Christian mystic, who said that if you've got some potato seeds, they're going to grow into potatoes. Man is a God seed, so man ought to grow into a God. That's the message, that man has an enormous potential, which he should be able to realise, and which he virtually never realises. That and the fact that man's obligation to maintain the cosmos. I mean, a lot of people talk about working for the planet, don't they? But they don't really understand what's involved.
You were answering Suzanne's question. You said that the second body at death, once it has left the body, does not have any influence. But you said at the beginning of your talk that Gurdjieff could, in fact, slay an ox or propel it into sleep, and that presumably being through projection, when he would be mad.
But he killed the yak by accumulating his physical forces through the physical body. You haven't got a physical body. You can't change any or accumulate anything.
In other words, you're using your secondary body, the energies from.
You see, it's like healing, aren't there? There are two kinds of genuine healers. There's the man who puts his hands on somebody and projects his hand blood side. I don't know what I would like to call it, to heal. There's also the saint who simply puts his hand, and it is so. Quite different levels. Both men far above us, but quite different levels from each other. And it is all due to the question of the laws. How many laws are there? See?
Yes, you see, I'm thinking when you're in the astral world, talking about the afterlife, spiritual world, your second body is in fact affected by emotions of fear in lots of cases.
Yeah.
And it's the mind that controls that still.
Should do, but unfortunately it doesn't, does it?
Yeah. Are you saying it's the energy of the physical body that is aiding from the mind? In other words, the mind is drawing upon the energy of the physical body.
Yeah, the teaching is quite simple, but there are three separate parts to a man. There's a mind. If the mind says something, it's right to do something, and the body doesn't want to do it, I mean, get up early in the morning or whatever, then you've got an impasse. So the feelings have got to come in, one way or the other, whatever they decide.
So the emotional love for healing.
You see, this is the allegory of Adam and Eve, isn't it? It's nothing. Adam and Eve, nothing to do with sex. It's Adam and Eve and the serpent. And the serpent is lowest near the ground, represents the body. Adam, of course, the mind, and Eve, the emotions. And Adam knows that what is suggested, which is that man should be able to determine his own destiny, is wrong. But Eve is attracted by the blandishment of the serpent. The idea there is that the body, the instincts of the man are to be lazy and to do what he wants to do, not to work hard and slave away and make effort. And Eve, representing the emotions, goes for that. So poor old Adam, it's 2 to 1. So he was like that in each of us. The 2 aspects of the 3 aspects of the mind.
So in the second world, Dick, is there any possibility for the second body, through what it comes to be aware of, to transform any energy, or has its capacity to transform energy finished with the physical body?
Yes, it needs the physical body in order to transform any energy. It's just as you may know how to drive a car, but you won't get anywhere unless you've got the car to sit in, will you? You see?
So in a sense, then, that at the second level, although man may come to his realizations at that level, it's not enabling him to actually make a contribution.
The contribution he makes, I suppose, in a way, is repentance, is the realization of his failing, and also a possibility seeing where things might be different next time. See, usually if you look back on life, it's not when you're older now anyway, it's not a question so much that you did certain things wrong. It's not a question so much that you didn't do certain things, it's that you did certain things wrong. Certain things would have been better not being done at all. You very often find that. If you look back, you see you did something which shouldn't have been better not done, from some urge in yourself, some motivation, which would have been better not to have given way to. So that you can see all that in what the Buddhists call bardo, which is this state, isn't it?
And this presumably is purgatory, according to
G, no, that's not purgatory. According to G, purgatory is something different, but what is the word? I think the word is I don't know, Hades, isn't it? That's the word, Hades. H-A-D-E-S. Meaning the dark, the great. No, purgatory, according to G, is a state that at a certain point evolving man must pass through. You see that in addition to all the other problems, there's no question that however perfect a man is, and it's only a matter of being relatively perfect, he's still, as it were, contaminated by existence, by materiality, and therefore very difficult to be accepted, as it were, in the invisible world. And it's the real, in other words, for that a certain purification is needed. That's what he called purgatory. But I think that yes, I think the words that you're thinking of, the state afterwards, the paradise and Hades, aren't they? According to whether one has lived on the whole a good life or a bad life.
Yes, I mean, I was thinking of New Testament terminology here.
Yeah. Yes, well, of course, it's the Christian emphasis, of course, is rather different. You see, all the Gospels have been falsified to a large extent. You can imagine that they were translated, first of all, weren't they, from Aramaic into Greek, and then they're translated from Greek into English and other Western languages, and very early on, at each stage, the clerk, if he didn't understand something, he would alter it to see things to make sense, and he may have altered the meaning a bit. So I don't know that one can rely entirely on the accuracy of each. For instance, the word, what was it, metanoia, this is now generally recognised, the word metanoia in the Greek was translated as repentance, which is normally understood to mean feeling sorry that you've done something. But actually, metanoia actually means a turning round, facing in another direction. In other words, starting to behave differently, which is rather different from just being feeling guilty, just repenting. A lot of little things like that have to be explained. The interesting thing, as I say, is that science is latching on now to a lot of the teachings of Gurdjieff that he presented 80 years ago now, 70 or 80 years ago. They're getting on to them now.
Is that psychology or all science? As in, is that just psychology science, like science of the mind, or is it all science, say relativity and things like that? So are they looking into the energy aspect of energy doesn't die, it transforms from one form of energy to another?
Yes, Gary's saying that, do you feel that it is psychological science which is now beginning to reflect G's views, or is it physical science as well?
Physical science, and particularly higher mathematics, of course. The mathematicians now are discovering these things. The existence of multiple universes is one such concept that they're getting on to now.
The introduction of computers has helped now because of the massive calculations required. I said that the introduction of computers has helped a lot in that because the calculations would have physically taken too long.
It has helped enormously because you've still got to have the genius who knows how to use them.
Yes.
Professor Hawkins or something like that.
Just building it for a moment on that question, what did G feel about contemporary psychology like Freud, Jung, Adler, which was presumably excellent in his time? Did he feel that this was helpful, or was he talking about another kind of psychology?
Yes, he was certainly talking about another kind of psychology, and Dr. Nicol, who was a pupil of, the junior doctor to Dr. Jung, another psychiatrist in the same school, eventually said to Dr. Jung, your aim is to bring people up to a sort of normality in ordinary life. What can you do for people who want to go on beyond that and require something more? And Jung said, I'm sure they'll find their own way. But this didn't satisfy Dr. Nicol, so he went to Gurdjieff. And Dr. Nicol was a very prominent London psychiatrist. In addition, he was very fortunate in that his father had left him a lot of money, and so he packed it all in when he was in the middle 50s, set up a workplace at Great Hamwell, and taught there and elsewhere until he died in 1953. Just about the time I started 40 years ago, isn't it? No, you can't look now. I'm an old man. You can't look really expect to find people who are knocking around with these legendary figures now.
Well, you don't look an old man, sir, I'll say that. But this work has obviously prevented you aging.
Yeah.
I imagine that's the secret.
The point is that you're quite right. When a teacher goes, a lot depends on the teacher. But I indicated, I think, earlier on that there'll be one or two people who will have got enough to go on doing something on their own, maybe in a different way, it doesn't matter. Whereas there are others still who will go on imitating outwardly. And so therefore, teachers have come along since Gurdjieff. Dr. Nicol and John Bennett are two outstanding examples who've contributed something of their own. You see, the teaching can only go on if it's reviewed. It doesn't mean altering it, but it means renewing it. It means bringing it up to date, as it were, presenting it appropriately for the time. You can't go on simply. In religion, you can. I mean, the ritual of the High Mass, for instance, has something that's gone over the centuries, and because that contains an amount of teaching. For instance, in the High Mass, there's the priest and the deacon and the subdeacon, and they do certain things in unison. Well, there's a demonstration of the three sides of a man's being, isn't it? They've got to be working together in unison. The mind, the heart, and the body. Certain points in the service, they look to the east, which is the source of esotericism. So on. So in religion, it's rather different. The ritual contains a teaching in itself, but with the fourth way teachings, it's not so. As I indicated, most of the ideas are found in other traditions, or many of them. It's just a question of the emphasis. I think it was Gurdjieff who once said that all true esoteric traditions, teachings, to a degree resemble one another. If you find one that's entirely 100% new, then it's man-made and it's useless, because all the great teachings have something in common. You find the same thing.
Sorry to keep asking questions, but one really important question, for me anyway. You've talked about the renewal from time to time of what we call Gurdjieff's teaching.